This is B of C Live, the video and podcast series of Business of Cannabis. Find out all that we do at businessofcannabis.com. Coming up on our B of C Live segment, a conversation with Katie Pringle. She's the co-founder of Marigold Marketing and PR. We're talking to Katie about Tether, a platform that connects the industry to budtenders, as well as help the budtenders connect to their ever-growing community. This is a conversation with Katie Pringle. Katie Pringle, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's nice to see you. Someday, at some point soon, we'll see each other in person, probably, I hope, because that would be nice. We used to do maybe once a year or twice a year lunch in Oakville together. I'd like to get back to that. If you're into it, I'd like to do that again.
Me too. Yeah, sounds good.
Someday soon. But that's not why we're talking today, although if you want to make a plan, we can set it on the calendar now. But I want to talk about, you guys are doing work on the budtender front, which I love. I want to talk about Tether. I want to talk about what you're learning from budtenders. I want to talk about Budtender Appreciation Week. Can we do all those things?
We definitely can. That's
Good.
Great.
Let's start with Tether and what that is and then what you guys have built and put together. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So early last year, we really dug in on sort of the retailer and budtender front and started really having a lot of great conversations and trying to figure out the gap, right? Because there didn't seem to be a lot of opportunities for brands to engage with budtenders kind of agnostically outside of sort of different retail banners. A lot of retailers doing a great job with their own staff and their own team and product development, product knowledge, but there didn't seem to be a ton of other opportunities. And so last summer we launched Tether. And we look at it as a community for budtenders. Our focus is really around creating really fun events. We launched in Edmonton with a budtender gathering. It sold out really quickly. We worked with Parkland Flower and Viridis, and it was a really amazing opportunity, which really was the beginning of us starting to gather a little bit more knowledge. And so our next initiative with Tether was a survey that we conducted in the fall with over 300 budtenders.
And what are budtenders saying? Like, this is like people be waiting with bated breath. What are they saying?
What are they saying? So, it was really interesting because it's a few kind of key arenas came out in the survey. And so we're actually going to be presenting the survey on Wednesday, February 9th on Marigold Live, which we'll share the recording after as well.
Amazing.
But kind of the three areas that came out is that they're really looking for education through experience. They're looking for industry advancement and community engagement. So those kind of three areas we thought were some amazing nuggets. Like, I think a lot of the sales agencies have been doing an amazing job putting out product knowledge and marketing material and visiting budtenders. But what they're really telling us is they want brand experiences. They want to go to parties. They want, farm gate tours. They want cultivation tours. And so we really think that opens the opportunities for brands to find real, authentic, memorable ways to engage with the people at the forefront of all the decision making.
Yeah, it's funny because we talk to brands a lot about, creating unique stories around the brand that is compelling, so a budtender can make that case to a consumer when they come in the store. Yeah. I think your point, like, there is a gap between what can we do for that budtender to make that not just a story they could tell, but actually an experience that they have, and then tell a story that is really even a deeper connection, because it is so important, that connection between budtender consumer and budtender representing the brands. And I can only assume that they feel that because they are fielding literally every question from consumer.
For sure. And they told us as well that consumer feedback is part of what is helping their recommendations. So it really is a two-way street in terms of the dialogue between the budtender and the consumer. The number one way they want to get to know brands is through sampling. I don't think that's any secret. I know it is not without its challenges, including if retailers want to do that for their budtenders, it's a high cost for them. So, they are looking for ways to build a lot of preference that they can then pass on to consumers. They take their jobs pretty seriously. Like, 70% of bud tenders told us they want a career in cannabis. Like, I think that is really amazing, understanding retail's only been around for a couple of years, to see what, you know, the job market's going to look like for cannabis and for sales reps and for all these amazing roles that could be a great next step for a bud tender. So that, I think, is kind of cool.
I want to ask you a question, because obviously it's about creating this community of and for and by bud tenders, and sort of like, do they feel a kinship between and among stores, like either within a neighborhood or as a sort of important frontline sort of, you know, the face of cannabis to many, many people? Like, is there sort of this camaraderie, as you're talking about, among and between bud tenders as they sort of head out into the world?
Yeah, that's really, so it's really interesting. So we definitely asked if they were interested in engaging with other bud tenders. 80% told us they were, which I think is a huge number of people. We didn't specifically ask about camaraderie with other retailers, but in some of the free form questions and answers, people were telling us that they did feel in some saturated markets that there was competitiveness versus sort of an industry, you know, togetherness, which you understand, right? Depending on where you're working and your loyalty towards that retailer. So that's an interesting question, Jay. There's kind of a mix of both there.
I'm sure there is. And I know that my specific neck of the woods in downtown Toronto, there are lots of bud tenders milling about because there's lots of stores. And I also know that they are very good at my neighborhood, at least, integrating into the fabric of the neighborhood, right? Other, you know, my barber and the corner stores, like they've done their work to like make their way into the other sort of supporting network of stores. It's quite an interesting thing. And I wonder, like, thinking about where we were years ago, so pre-2018, and maybe most of 2018, certainly here in Ontario, like there was always talk that this part of the sector, the bud tenders, are critically important, but it's almost like that's been proven true, but also like on steroids. Like, it is like the critical gap between brands and consumers is that frontline bud tender.
Yeah, 100%. And they were kind of forgotten in some ways along the way with a lot of the industry events that have been developed. It's neat to see some of the conferences now opening up. Like, we know Cannabis is doing free tickets for retailers on one of the days, and Lyft is doing some stuff for bud tenders. And so that's awesome, because, you know, it is a challenge. Like, you're a small retailer. How many employees do you have? How many can you send to some career development opportunity all on one day, probably on a Saturday, on your busiest day of the week? So yeah, it's really not without its challenges. But there are even like parties and events. You look at other industries like bartenders, you know, they have huge following. They can really drive sales depending on where they're working with their persona and their flair and all they have going on. They have an opportunity to impact their own income in a really big way. And so there's that gap for bud tenders. Meanwhile, it's definitely not a traditional retail job where you're going in without passion. I don't know about you. Did you ever work in retail? Like,
yes. It's hard.
Did you care? Like, you know, like these people care. Like in other industries, you go to the mall, you're not seeing that same kind of passion from just a general retail worker. It's a totally different environment.
They love the product, love the consumers, love the environment. It's really, and they like, I think many really like the education process, right? They are subject matter experts with consumers in real time. As this runs, we will post how to get in touch with you on the 9th, which is, this is Tuesday, so it's tomorrow, and we will post. And if you do this, you can point to where the information is going to be. It's very YouTube-ish, so we'll do that. It's down below. That's where all the information is about Katie, about Tether, about their Bud Tender Appreciation Week, which is coming up March 21st through the 25th, if I'm not wrong. And there'll be more information there. I encourage folks to get in touch with Katie and her team and about Bud Tender Appreciation Week, about the work they're doing with Tether. Thank you, Katie, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you for lunch in Oakville soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Katie. That was BFC Live. If you like this program, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also find us wherever you find your podcasts. We're able to do what we do because of ongoing partnerships with Alterna Savings, Cannabis at Work, Cannabis Benchmark, Ken Delta, Gallagher, Headset, and Torque and Maine. Find out all that we do at businessofcannabis.com.